Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining our very first Axiom Discovery Series in Singapore. I believe I haven't met all of you, so I will do a quick intro of myself. My name is Yolanda Chen. I am the General Manager of Axiom Asia Pacific. On behalf of Axiom, I want to welcome all of you, to this wonderful event. It's awesome to see so many lawyers. I'm no legal by nature. I'm a sales and marketing and business development person. And my background has been in the tech sector, technology sector mostly. So it's my pleasure to meet with all of you today. We have a very, very exciting agenda of the Axiom Discovery Series, probably quite jam-packed agenda for today, besides lunch. What we're doing in this Axiom Discovery Series, some of you were asking me, what is this about, right? So the Axiom Discovery Series is not meant for us to sell you what we have. It's more for you to come around and network on a particular topic. So today, the topic is cybersecurity law. We have one of our star Axiomite, James, who fly over with me from Hong Kong. I will introduce him later on to actually, talk about this subject, share his experience as well as, his best practices. This is a forum for you, right? A forum for the GCs and corporate counsels to actually share thoughts, discuss a topic, and very much, voice out any issues or concerns or bring up any questions, and we can bounce around the room, right? With 30 people here, we can probably solve a problem. And so we can share best practices, learn about the trends, learn about the insights from each other.
Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. So glad to see everyone here today. Hope you like the appetizer. So I'm Singapore qualified, right? So I've spent the last year advising SAP on their cybersecurity law, especially in China, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, right? So welcome to the digital economy, right? Every single company represented here today has valuable data that other people might want, right? We might be thinking of doing many things with our data. We might be doing data analytics. If your data isn't already in the cloud, you might be thinking of moving into the cloud, or allowing mobile device use, bring your own devices. Every single one of these things involves a certain amount of cybersecurity risks, right? So the thing about cybersecurity, right, is that if you do it well, if you're great at it, nobody gives you a gold star, nobody pats you on the back, no one, it's just business as usual. But it's when things go wrong, or when security is not done well enough, that things hit the fan. Information theft, right? Based on a survey of 1,894 Australian companies that have basically gotten their information stolen, right? These are the sort of information that is affected. It depends on what sort of industry you are in, right? If you're in retail, basically credit card information of your customers, right? If you're in the government, it's more internal documentation. But of course, credentials. Because why? People want to see your login ID. People want to see your passwords so they can go in and steal even more stuff, right? So this is the sort of things that are being affected. And why? Why are people doing it? Look at the blue columns. Overwhelmingly, this is for financial reasons, right? Ransomware means basically you pay them money in Bitcoin to get your information unlocked, So yeah, they're doing this for money. Unless you're in the government, then they're doing this because of espionage, because of hacktivism, or because of sheer fun. Right. So since we have so many lawyers in one room today, I just thought it might be fun if we take a look at the laws a bit, right? So today we're going to focus on 3 key Asian jurisdictions: mainland China, because that's the biggest economy this side of the world; Hong Kong, global financial center and Commonwealth jurisdiction; as well as Singapore, because we're all here today, right? So under mainland China, in mainland China, the overarching cybersecurity law is the China Cybersecurity Law, right? And under that, you have 18 to 20 different implementing regulations in different stages of draft or consultation forms. In Hong Kong and Singapore, not so complicated. PDPA for Singapore, everyone's probably familiar with that. PDPO in Hong Kong, that's the equivalent, right? Singapore and Hong Kong, we only have one data privacy commissioner, which makes things easier. Whereas in China, we have 4 different regulators. You have the CAC, Cyberspace Administration of China. You have the MIIT, right? It's all there. You have the Ministry of Public Security. That's actually the police, right? Enforcing cybersecurity law. We'll talk about that later. And the market regulator, right? So this presents a whole different set of problems. If you think about it, 4 different regulators looking at the same space. Well, we'll explore a little bit of that later, okay? So I did a comparison, right, between the general principles of data protection across mainland China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. You will see, right, significant overlap, right? But one thing is very clear. Cybersecurity, data security, right, is a prerequisite for data protection. Makes sense, right? Because you can't say that, yeah, we're compliant with data privacy laws when your data is not secure. It's just not possible, right? So across China, Hong Kong, and Singapore, you see the data security principle and the protection obligation in Singapore as the main obligation for cybersecurity. Let's dig a little bit deeper, right? Lawyers, law, okay. Section 24, PDPA, right, requires reasonable security arrangements to be made to prevent, unauthorized access of data, right? What's reasonable? Well, this is what a reasonable person would consider appropriate in the circumstances, right? Sounds reasonable, right? Hong Kong, very different standard. All practicable steps should be taken to protect, against unauthorized disclosure, processing, things like that. Okay, I'm going to take a step back, right, to say all practicable steps does not mean total security, because there is no such thing as total security. Hackers are great at what they do, right? There is only state of the art, okay? So it needs to be proportionate to the degree of sensitivity, of the data and the sort of harm that's going to result in terms of the breach, right? Looking at China, Article 21 of the China cybersecurity law shows very detailed, very sort of granular sort of requirements. Compare this with Singapore with reasonableness, Hong Kong with all practicable steps, and China with all sorts of very, very minute details that you need to look at, right? You need to make sure there's a team, right? Data security team. You need to take technical measures to prevent cyber attacks, network intrusions, right? And if you take away something from today's lunch, aside from calories, right, it's 6 months. This is the key time frame that you need to keep cybersecurity, network logs in China, right? Because what we've seen is the regulators coming in to ask these companies, hey, look, there has been some complaints, right? Show me your network logs. And if the response is like, well, we don't have them, or, oh, we overwrite them after 3 months, then that response is no longer acceptable because this has been very clearly stated in Article 21 CCSL, right? So I mean, if you have your Chief Information Security Officer or CTO, after today's lunch, you just go back to check, say, hey, look, are you keeping your network logs in China for at least 6 months, right? Because there are penalties under Chinese law, okay? Not just financial penalties, but also personal penalties on the people in charge, right? You also need to classify your data, back it up, encrypt it. So very, very granular sort of things that you need to sort of like look into if you are looking after China as a market. So what are sort of trends that we're seeing, right? We know the law, right? But what's actually happening? Check out China, like this whole laundry list of measures, specifications, regulations, laws regarding cybersecurity and data protection. Then you might ask, why this sudden explosion in laws? And these all date from May 2019. I'm just focusing on the latest ones now, right? Well, rewind 1 year. March 2018, President Xi Jinping did make a speech to say cybersecurity is national security, right? So this is the tone from the very, very top, right? So if you hear about that and you think a bit, say, okay, then this makes sense, right? So you see the regulators and legislature, well, it's the drafters of the civil code and people like that are actually taking this as a top priority because this is national security, right? And you see things like data security administrative measures. You see things like cross-border data transfer restrictions. You see things like measures on critical network equipment. So all these things, even though it's in draft form right now, is expected to hit either end of this year or early next year. But the trade war is keeping China pretty busy, so these are put to the back burner. But you see, once the trade war dies down, we expect to see all these things coming into effect pretty soon, right? Hong Kong, slightly less exciting, but change is afoot, right? The Privacy Commissioner in Hong Kong has submitted sort of an application to the government to ask them to sort of revise the PTPO to expand the scope of their powers, right? Anyone from insurance in the room today? Insurance? Yeah. So you might already know, right, that the Hong Kong Insurance Authority is issuing guidelines for cybersecurity for insurers effective next year, okay? Singapore, no less exciting, right? We have the NRIC guidelines that just came into effect for September this year, right? Regarding the control of how you collect and use NRIC numbers, right? And because of the SingHealth attack, right, you're going to see 13 new measures for cybersecurity for the public service sector in Singapore coming up to be introduced. And you see things like data portability, right, which is a concept directly imported by GDPR. It's not in the PDPA, right, but this has been put forward for public consultation. So you see the Singapore regulator also considering what is being done in Europe, best practices around the world, and bringing it in, right, for consideration here in Singapore. Any banks in the house today? Banks? Okay, you might already know this, but MAS has sort of issued a notice on cyber hygiene for compulsory cybersecurity requirements that's going to kick into effect next year, right? So you see, we live in this time of change. Data privacy and cybersecurity is not a static sort of law. We constantly need to sort of keep updated to see what's coming up around the region. And people copy from each other, right? So you see what's happening in California. It's sort of like a direct, influence from GDPR and this side of the world as well. So we know the law, and we know where it's going. What exactly are regulators focusing on, right? In mainland China, we talked about this, right? There are 4 different regulators. So there's a little bit of healthy competition going on. You see, they're sort of falling over themselves, right, to compete to see who can enforce the law better, right? So you see different sort of nationwide enforcement campaigns from the different regulators to clean up the internet, to shut down unlawful websites with illegal information, and to sort of inspect companies in critical information infrastructure, right, to make sure that they are complying with cybersecurity law, right? Hong Kong, right, because of the protests that's been going on for the last few months, we've seen a sharp uptick in sort of unauthorized online disclosure of personal information of policemen or politicians, which the PDPC is, which the PCPD is investigating. But because the PCPD does not have very strong enforcement powers, that has been left to the police, right? As at 28th of August this year, there's been more than 768 cases of this sort of thing. So you can imagine how busy the Privacy Commissioner is in Hong Kong right now, dealing with all these things, okay? Singapore, no less exciting. You have more than 20 companies fined, warned, given directions, for PDPA breaches this year, right? If you look at most of these companies were sort of fined for failure to meet the protection obligation. That's cybersecurity obligations, right? So For example, a F&B company in Singapore was fined $16,000 this year. If you read the cases, you'll know which company it is. I'm not mentioning names here, but they woke up one day to find out that, hey, I can't access any of my employees' information. Oh dear. Oh, there was a ransomware attack, and then the hackers said, pay us money, then we'll sort of like release the information back to you, right? So what they did was they sort of like isolated the system, tried to fix it and everything. But you see, they are victims in this whole case, right? But look, they were still fined, right? So the commission is not going to say, okay, I'm so sorry about this, but when they look into it and they say like, okay, did you take reasonable security measures to make sure that you have the right firewalls and people can't come in and install things like that? Well, in this case, no, so they were still fine. If you have seen an uptick in data breaches in the last few months, you're not dreaming. It is true, 2019 is set to be the record year for data breaches around the world, right? So, Mr. Stephen Wong, who's the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data in Hong Kong, did say that in the context of a data breach, data security is the crux of the compliance investigation, right? So when they look at the company in the context of a data breach, they look at what sort of security measures that you guys have put in place, how you guys have, the sort of steps that you have taken, right? So these are the minimum requirements under the law, right? Hong Kong, Singapore, not statutory requirement to inform in terms of a data breach, but we know that our customers, our shareholders and our partners expect more of us, right? So if there's a data breach, right, that's going to have a significant risk or impact to individuals, they expect to be notified, and that's only fair, right? Looking at mainland China, granular as ever, you see when under Article 25, when cybersecurity incidents occur, and there are a few things that we have to do, right? So as research for this seminar today, I spoke to 10 different lawyers, both in private practice and in-house, and these lawyers have actually gone through data breaches, right? Not on a no-names basis. I'm going to share my learnings from these conversations, right, on how sort of like they sort of responded to the data breach, right? So can I have a show of hands? Which organizations here do we have today have incident response teams right now? Okay, that's very good. That's very good. Is legal part of the incident response team? Yes, that's great. So you guys will be notified if there's something material that happens, so that's good. If you're not one of those people in the incident response team, do try to get yourself on board because that's important, right? So that's the first thing that they did, right? Once there was a suspected or confirmed data breach, this team was activated, and one of the first things that they did was to decide whether or not to bring in external experts, external people that have maybe law firms or cybersecurity experts, forensic experts, to figure out what actually happened, right? So step 2 will be immediate gathering of essential information. And you might ask, what sort of information do we need to find out? Well, things like, is the breach still going on, right? What information was affected, right? Where is it occurring, right? So if you look at the privacy website, PCPD, it's PCPD in Singapore, right? I think one of PDPC, right? In Singapore, right? They actually have an online form that you can actually log in and notify the commissioner about the data breach. Then you will see in the online form the sort of information that they need, right? Say, okay, the sort of information that was affected and things like that. So in peacetime, right? When we are still able to have lunch and things like that, that's the sort of information, that's the sort of preparation that we can do, right? To prepare for, something like this, all right? Containment measures, okay, step 3, all right? Once you find out there's a breach, okay, what can you do to stop it from getting worse, right? Containment and mitigation, right? For example, an insurance company in Singapore discovered that they sent out, well, 245 letters of insurance details to the wrong address. Well, what they did was they tried to recall all these letters. They got 243 back. One of them was lost in transit. But the commissioner looked at these mitigating measures and said, okay, fine, there was a breach, you will still be punished, but the sort of impact, the sort of harm was mitigated by what you guys did. So this is a step that you can do immediately to sort of, recover lost data or to minimize harm. And the commissioner will look at that and decide the sort of, penalty or directions accordingly, right? So once you have, step 1 to 4, then you will be in a position to assess, how severe it is, what sort of risk of harm this breach could possibly impact, right? Step 6 was something that the in-house counsels really reflected to me. I didn't hear this from external, but in-house, one of them, a very senior lawyer from New Zealand, she said, James, the first thing I did was to check my insurance, right? So I was like, oh yeah, that's smart, because your general and indemnity insurance may or may not cover losses stemming from data breach, right? But do have a quick check about it after lunch if you're not sure what's covered for you, right? If not, then there is cybersecurity insurance available in the market that you may consider talking to your CFO about, right? Step 7, right? Once you know what is affected, then there's reporting. You do know that when data breach happens, there are few interested parties, right, that might be interested in this data breach. One is, of course, the people who are directly affected by the data breach, your customers, your employees, perhaps. The regulator, depending if it is the sort of breach that needs to be reported, then yes, we do need to fulfill our legal requirements. The police, if it's a sort of data breach stemming from an illegal activity, right, they need to be involved. And if you're a listed company, we know that data breaches do have the potential to affect the stock price, and this sort of knowledge might have to be disclosed, if you are sort of like a regulated industry or regulated company, right? 8, do sort of leverage on your social media or media relations sort of team, right? So a very well-known hospitality company, right, before they announced the data breach on Twitter, right, they already had in place, right, hotlines, right, in the various countries, in their local languages, to deal with any sort of queries from affected users, right, from the data breach. So this is an example of things that were done well, right? So before you announce it, you already put all these things in place, and they did it within a span of 1 week. So it's like kudos to them, right, for doing so, right? So leverage on your social media and media relation strategies if this happens. Right? So I see everyone is starting to have lunch on your plate, which is great. I shall wait for this table, right, so that for fairness, right? And I'm not going to keep you guys away from lunch for too long, but right now I'm here, I'm going to open up to the floor on any sort of queries that you may have in terms of what you've just heard, or what your organization is sort of like concerned about, or things like that. Thank you everyone.